that.
There's a song, and I'm trying to get the words. Ich bin nur ein armer Reisegesell. Gute Nacht, liebes Mädchen, gute Nacht. You ever heard that song?
No. What is
It's
that?
about I'm only a poor journeyman. Good night, little girl, good night.
I mean, I'm not really that interested, clearly, in the general history. I'm interested in your part in it.
Gross Breesen probably had
wait.
more influence on me than anything else except my parents' home. We were pretty much separated from the rest.
Of Germany.
Was ist unser heutiges Deutschland? Nicht wieder schön und herrlich. Indem ich euch überblicke, weiß ich, mein Lebenskampf ist nicht umsonst gekämpft.
The German Bundestag recently ratified participation in the International Criminal Court, while the United States has withdrawn its involvement in the international body.
Have you heard the one about the Jewish farmer? It sounds like a bad joke, which is fitting since I'm sitting in a hotel room at a Catskills resort. How did I get here? It started with a conversation that I had with my dad almost 20 years ago that I preserved on audio tape.
Do you want to tell me about Gross Breesen, or do you want to
But I
say...
mean, what you want to say before Gross Breesen. Gross Breesen is a story in itself. In a way, we had our own little homeland there, although
It's hard to believe that those words started me chasing across Europe, through Poland, Russia, and Germany, and now upstate New York. I'm attending a reunion of a group of older German Jews who call themselves Gross Breeseners. They were all Jewish farmers. In 1936, my father, Rudi Caplan, left the only home he had ever known for a secluded farm deep in the German countryside. The Gross Breesen school trained a group of teenagers in agriculture hoping to escape from Nazi Germany. The farm saved my father's life and the lives of over 150 Jewish boys and girls before the onslaught of World War II and the Holocaust. 65 years later, I decided to find the farm. I never realized my dad had a German accent. I couldn't hear it, even when it was pointed out to me.
You remember Yates Avenue?
I remember it, sure.
You remember.
Sure.
Did that get the sound too?
Mm-hmm.
but getting upstairs and downstairs, she does it.
My dad's name was Rudolph Caplan, Rudi, and this is how I always remember him. Me at 8 years old feeling secure with him holding on to me. My dad was a German Jew who escaped the Nazis. He moved to Chicago after World War II and met my mom, Florence. They raised my brother David and me. My mom died 20 years ago. 7 years ago, my dad died. My father was from Königsberg, the capital of East Prussia. He was very proud of being East Prussian. East Prussians were the ultimate Germans. My father's family was Jewish for 2 days a year on the high holidays, but they were Prussian every day.
Places. So my father had a job as a journeyman in Katowice. Now Auschwitz is not very far from Katowice. And that's where he met my mother. I don't know when they came to Königsberg.
I needed to go to Königsberg before I went to try and find Gross Breesen because I wanted to see the world through my dad's eyes, a world that was once open to him.
Pociąg pośpieszny z Budowy Zdrój do Planowo przejeżdżający o godzinie 7:30.
Königsberg was a royal city. It was the capital of East Prussia. It was the home to philosophers like Immanuel Kant and to artists like Katie Kollwitz. I hoped to see the world through Rudi's eyes as a child, to see the world that was once his.
Kaiserstraße 38. I was born there. I lived there all the time. I was in Königsberg. On the first floor was a little bank. On the street level was a bank.
My dad built a darkroom for me when I was 13. He was an amateur photographer who took most of the pictures in this album. I remember seeing it from a very young age. When I look at these pictures, these little slices of his youth and of his teenage years, and of my grandparents, Bruno and Minna, I see a very distant land where people had no idea what was coming. After World War II, the Soviet Union took over Königsberg, and it became Kaliningrad. It was a military city. No one from the West could travel there.
And on the other, we were on the corner. On the other side was the grocery store. And next to it was a school supply place. And I know he became an SS man.
Okay.
I realized that there was a part of my father's life, a part of my life, a story that I had heard as a child, which had much greater meaning than I had ever really thought about. There's something about going to the actual place that
it is for many of us, it is similar to the place of birth. Similar.
And that's really the story that I'm exploring. I'm doing it through my father because he's the one I know the best.
Yeah, sure.
But it really does apply to the whole story. So he becomes my doorway into the whole story.
Yes, but of course the story of each person is different. Like the life of each person is other than other people's life.
It is, but there is something so unique about the Gross Breesen experience, and I want to preserve that. And I know going to this farm, it's ultimately it's just a farm, but it's not.
The minute Hitler was nominated, one of the teachers, social studies teachers, he had a swastika on his lapel. It had been behind his lapel all this time. And this same person later on became the mayor of Würzburg.
We had a factory, a timber factory in the Bavarian woods, but we lived in Nuremberg where my father had his offices. I went to school in Nuremberg, no great pleasure. The years after 1932 were really pretty bad.
We were living on the north side of town, close to where our business was, and most of the Jews lived on the south side of the town. I was always the only Jew in class all my school years, and it was quite bad.
You didn't go to Jewish school, though. I mean, you were assimilated, the Jews.
There was only one other Jew in my class.
Okay. So you left there, though, when you were 15.
Right. You know, Hitler came on January 30, 1933.
This whole fear started on January 30th when Hitler came to power. And there was a big commotion. And I followed the stream of people. And I asked what's going on. And I was told he just came to power. And so all the way home to my house, I cried because it was such a scary thing for me to know it has happened.
And my father, unfortunately, didn't believe that Hitler would last.
Well, I was aware of it, but not enough to get out myself. We thought this was going to blow over, quote, blow over.
None of these people thought that Hitler was going to be around for a long time.
Dziękuję. Nach der Brücke links und dann bei der Kreuzung rechts.
Rechts here? Carolina, my wonderful German camerawoman, said that this feels like we're shooting a road movie, and I said, this is a road movie in a strange way. To fly across the ocean, to find one place, to stand in one place, it's crazy. I don't know where this draw came from. I still don't know. It made no sense at the time, it makes no sense now. But maybe it was this desire to stand in one place where people that I knew stood 60 years ago and had a very different experience.
My Christian friends had to join the Hitler Youth movement, and from that time I was completely isolated. I was sitting in front of the class by myself and had to defend myself against the insults from the students who were sitting in back of me. Not only
they were spitting at us, and people threw rocks at us. It was bad.
How did you perceive them? They were in power.
Well,
they had taken over.
Put yourself in the United States in that boat. Yeah, you know there are anti-Semites in this country. By the thousands, by the 10,000s, by the 100,000, maybe by the millions. What would your idea be if they somehow get to power? Would you think that you can't live here any longer?
I don't ever remember not knowing about the Holocaust. It was an ever-present part of my childhood. From my Aunt Helen's concentration camp tattoo to the fact that my dad and his brother Gunther never spoke German with each other. My father wasn't anti-German. In fact, he was very supportive of me when I decided to study German in high school and in college.
I had been in the Jewish youth organization, the non-Zionist one, and I was a very enthusiastic member of that group.
It was a sort of a flight into a youth movement because all our friends who were non-Jewish were and had to be in youth movements. And so I joined. In fact, I had to go into the city to go to the meetings, which today I'm surprised my parents let me go, because it meant several bus transfers, and I always carried my guitar with me because we would sing and play guitar.
I turned more and more to the Jewish organizations for my pleasurable things in life. I belonged to the, what was that called? The youth organization in, we all belong.
Bund Deutscher Juden.
Bund Deutscher Juden, right, that's it. And because of that, we heard of Gross Breesen.
Well, in the first place, not all parents thought it would blow over.
Some German Jews planned new lives for their children. There were the Zionists and the non-Zionists. The Zionists intended to go to Palestine. The non-Zionists wanted to keep their German Jewish identity. They would train Jewish youth in farming. These teenagers would become the vanguard of a new movement in a new country. It would be a movement based on German Jewish culture.
My sister wanted to go to Palestine, but I was not interested in Israeli homeland, you know.
Entire populations were displaced after World War II. Königsberg became Kaliningrad. Now we're going to Gross Breesen, which used to be in Germany. Now it's in Poland. I must admit that I had this image in my head that when we crossed the border into Poland, that it would look different. There's something that just makes my skin crawl. The strange thing about Eastern Europe is, as borders change, people's entire lives shift. As wars shift borders. In my case, it was both the wars and the Holocaust that changed everything about my family.
As a youngster, for many years, I knew I wanted to become a lawyer. And when the Nazis came to power, and I realized there was really no more law in Germany, I thought that farming was the one occupation with which one could stay in Germany.
I also started studying economics, but when after Hitler came to power, I had to give that up, and in 1934 I intended to become a farmer. You see, most of the Jews in Germany were engaged in business. At that time, I thought by showing that we work with our hands, that we can remain in Germany.
I knew a little about farming, I knew a little bit about animals, and I thought that would be ideal. And there was really nothing else you could do. It was a terrible situation.
in learning to cope with the situation, it takes always two things, or three. It takes the situation itself, it takes your own thinking and will, and if you're lucky, it takes some leadership that shows you which way you can go.
Well, he was just unique. He was just unique. There wouldn't have been any Breesen without Bondi. There's not the slightest doubt about it.
Kurt Bondi was a revolutionary psychologist. It was Martin Buber, the esteemed German Jewish philosopher, who suggested that Bondi run Gross Breesen. Kurt Bondi believed that he could mold these teenagers, who were away from their parents, away from the cities, and away from the anti-Semitism, into self-sufficient, self-aware, and proud German Jews. He wanted these young German Jews to become physically strong, people who could work the land, and who were educated, a thoroughly modern people. The German Jewish community, under the leadership of the famous Berlin rabbi Leo Baeck, sponsored Gross Breesen. Their hope was to train and educate these teenagers to start new communities of German Jews in exile.
He founded that school on three principles. One, to remain true to our Jewish religion. Second, to maintain our German cultural background. And third, to become efficient and effective farmers.
What I knew was that it was a school to train young men and women who had to get out of Germany for agricultural work overseas.
Somehow we were contacted that Gross Breesen was being established, and I got interested with your father. We both applied together.
This was at George's farm. He was one of the few Gross Breeseners who actually started his own farm. And there is George and Jesse and Hella and Heidi. I had a crush on Hella. We were about the same age. Hat gerade und rechts gesagt?
Eigentlich meinte er links, ne? Oder hier. Ich weiß es nicht.
Ja, ich habe ihn Bravo gehört, aber das weiß ich nicht. I wasn't sure that this was the right castle. I've always thought of it as a place that only existed in black and white. Unfortunately, I was right. It was the wrong castle. How many different castles can there be, for God's sakes? We'll start fresh tomorrow. I remember when I was about 10 years old, we were talking about religion in school, and everyone had to talk about who they were. One kid stood up and said, "I'm a Catholic." And another one stood up and said, "I'm a Protestant." And I stood up and I said, "I'm a Jew." Later, one of my friends came up to me and said, "You know, you don't say that. You're a Jew. You say that you're Jewish. Jew is a bad word." And I didn't understand that. And I went home and asked my dad if Jew was a bad word. And he told me that it wasn't. I never really understood what that was about until years later.
My father took me for a walk, and he said, you and your brothers will have to leave this country as soon as you can. He said, we old folks, we will have to sit it out. He changed his mind ultimately, but at that time, that's what he thought. We will have to do as best we can, but you must get out.
I mean, Hitler was in power.
Well, I think it was evident because by 35, if not earlier, that the younger generation had no future in Germany.
Przez Gosławice, najpierw Brzezinka Średzka, a później Gosławice musi pani przyjechać.
Dobrze, dziękuję.
Proszę.
We got directions to another castle. We saw something in the distance. I was scared by now, scared that we might not find it, scared that we would, and that it would be different somehow, not what I thought it should be. It was the right place this time. It was in the midst of a major renovation. The architect first looked at us like we had dropped from outer space. Later, he was thrilled to see the pictures that I had brought with me across the ocean.
Jest jedna w dół i w lewo do góry.
Aha, dobrze.
Zobaczycie tu Państwo przód, to wszystko.
Dobrze.
Ja zaraz...
Dobrze.
I really didn't quite know what to expect, so I accepted everything that came at me.
I arrived in Gross Breesen and I was quite happy there because I felt perhaps liberated.
I have to tell you honestly, it was not the agriculture. I went to Gross Breesen because I wanted to be with these people.
I guess I look forward to being with other Jewish people, not having to feel persecuted. I did not know what I was getting into.
The daily routine was to get up very early, 5 o'clock in the morning, take a cold shower, get dressed, have breakfast. Then after breakfast we had to go out immediately and line up in two long lines, and the chief inspector would come down and from where he lived strolled by us and point the finger and said, you are going to do this today, you are going to do that.
We had to serve a session in the carpenter shop for 6 weeks where we learned carpentry. We had to serve 6 weeks in the blacksmith shop where we learned how to put horseshoes on horses.
Every spring, when the fields were plowed, then you plowed up a lot of stones. So to protect the farm machinery later on, the stones had to be picked off. So we had baskets and we went along the row and picked stones every spring. That was not my favorite thing to do.
As far as the aim of Gross Breesen was, it was to train us to migrate all together to some place in the world where we were going to establish a colony, Jewish colony. And possibly that colony could have contained hundreds of thousands of people eventually.
Carola, I've got some photos here in my dad's photo album, and shows you out looking very like you're farming, and here you're doing some watering. Was that the garden there?
There was gardening.
Did you enjoy doing that type
I
of work?
loved doing the outdoor work, even though I had said earlier that agriculture was not my reason to go to Gross Breesen. I loved doing this, and yes, it was physically very strenuous. We really physically worked very hard.
Bondi tried very hard that we don't become farmers in the sense as you see a farmhand in the South, for example. Because he wanted us to be able to immigrate and run our farms or whatever we're going to come up with completely independent of anyone else.
He was unbelievable. He was just unbelievable. One straight line, you know, and if you crossed it.
Sometimes we had difference of opinion and we yelled at each other. but in general, he was a personality whom I admired.
Bondi was the kind of a person who commanded everybody's respect and to some extent love, and there was no question that he ruled the place with a very firm hand.
He came at least once a week to go through our room to see whether the beds were made well, whether everything was in order. And I was a pretty messy kid. And I'd sometimes, for instance, hide things inside the bed so that they wouldn't be on the floor. And he'd open up the bed and find the hidden things in bed.
No one knew anything about the history of the castle prior to World War II. They had heard rumors about a Jewish owner who had been pursued by a mob and had escaped through a secret tunnel. When I explained the actual history of the Gross Breesen farm, the architect had a hard time absorbing it. It was almost as if he could not believe that an important part of its history had just disappeared.
As far as Gross Breesen was concerned, we were on an island. We were happy and we felt completely secure because we didn't know what was going on in the rest of Germany.
I remember that I didn't read any newspapers. It was somehow or other, that was a different world.
I gave no thought what went on in the rest of the world. It was absolutely like an island.
But just being there, being isolated from our previous life where we were Jews, here we were all Jews and nobody was anti-Semitic. It was an island to us.
It was out there and we were in here.
Now, you said something to me 2 years ago, which was you said that you felt that my father was more affected by Gross Breesen than anyone else that you knew.
Well, he came to Gross Breesen as a typical young city person, and he very soon realized that if you want to live this kind of a life, you have to change your life, and he understood it.
Who was the sovereign when I was born? My sovereign.
Your sovereign?
Yeah.
Ferdinand.
Ferdinand?
Wasn't
He was a
Ferdinand.
bull. Or was it an elephant?
My dad always quizzed me. Who's that composer on the radio? I would look at him and say, oh, I don't know, Beethoven? And he'd look at me with not quite disdain, but certainly, I think, disappointment, and say, no, it's Chopin, or Mozart, or Copland. But I never knew how I was supposed to know that.
We had lectures, we had concerts, we had discussions.
One thing that was a steady enterprise were the 15 minutes music every night by a trio, and I think you may have seen pictures of that.
We had, of course, mainly of all, which you might have heard before, what Bondi called Lebenskunden.
Bondi picked up, he saw something where we were perhaps fooling around during the harvest, and he used that as his subject matter and philosophized as to what we should do, that we shouldn't play around, that this was serious business, for example.
One of his pet remarks were, live consciously, be sure what you're doing.
It stuck. We were conscious of what we were doing. We were told to be responsible for what we were doing and also to look out for each other.
It was a very excellent philosophy. It set the groundwork as to what we should be, how we should think, and what direction we should go, and it left an impression for the rest of my life.
Well, we also had a lot of we had a lot of freedom in the evenings too, and naturally, being youngsters, we had friends, right? And we spent a lot of time with our friends, and the sexes mixed in a, I mean, compared to today, in a very simple way. Let's put it that way.
Fairly soon after we got there, fell in love with one of the students, so she and I spent quite a bit of time together. That was not actually a part of the schoolwork.
You didn't see much of girls at that age, did you?
No. I hardly knew there was another sex.
You didn't date?
No. Girls were of a different sex in those days.
There wouldn't have been any sexual relations possible under his supervision. I know from...
Well, I knew it was understood that nobody had any sexual relationship while he wasn't in Gross Breesen. Whether any happened or not is, I don't know, but
How many girls were in Breesen? 25, 30?
25, 30.
Yeah, no more. So, and about 100 boys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1 to 3 about.
Hmm?
One ratio of 1 to 3.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. Think back.
Well, I remember Gross Breesen in a very positive way until Kristallnacht.
day of Kristallnacht. I really, it was just a horrible thing.
All of a sudden, some huge trucks arrived with a lot of SS, and they lined us up.
Well, now I'd rather tell you about what happened right when they came. I mean, they destroyed the windows.
And they picked out all the men who were over 18. And then they told them to get onto the trucks.
And then they destroyed the furniture.
And
the piano.
The trucks went off with them, and the rest, they were marched off. All the males went into the horse stable, and the females went into the hay barn.
Concentration camp. I'm not sure that we knew at the time. I know now it was Buchenwald.
I don't know if we had time to think of our emotions.
And they locked us in there, put an SS man in front.
You see, I was one of the oldest at that time, that I told everybody,
You know, we lived in
eat as much as you can,
castle.
because you don't know when you get your next
And
meal.
when they came in, they just busted every piece of glass there was, and nobody knew what was going on. It was a terrible, terrible thing.
They put a gun at my forehead, and they told me that they were trying to say, you have guns hidden, and if you don't produce the guns that you have hidden, we're going to shoot you.
Just, you know, like we said before, we didn't know what was going on outside, and then all of a sudden, bingo, this happened, you know. It was just horrible, just horrible.
Guck mal, die kaufen so auf den Flohmärkten so alte Möbel und die werden dann renoviert.
Was hier war.
Also die versuchen irgendwie wieder auch die Möbel in dem gleichen Stil darzustellen.
At least once a week, I was woken up in the middle of the night by the sounds of my father's nightmares. My eyes would open wide as blood-curdling screams pierced the night air. I was sure that he was seeing images of concentration camps, ovens, my grandparents, but he could never remember the dreams in the morning. I never doubted that my dad could take care of us, not for a moment. In fact, it was in those moments in the middle of the night, just before I fell back asleep, that I knew just how strong he was. My dad was not at Gross Breesen the day after Kristallnacht. He had injured himself and was laid up in an infirmary in Breslau. If he had been there, he would have been taken away with all the other older boys. The first night that Kurt Bondi and the boys got to Buchenwald, Bondi's steely resolve melted. He sat in his bunk sobbing, "Your parents entrusted me to take care of you, to keep you safe, and now look what's happened." The next day, he was back to being Bondi. He kept the boys together and strong for the next 30 days, until they were released. They were released with one proviso, that they would all leave Germany as soon as possible.
My brother was in a different camp. I never saw him again.
My mother, she did not survive. She was sent to Poland, to Warsaw in 1942.
I was really very protected. And especially talking to my brothers and sisters later on to what they went through, I really realized how much protected we were because we were in Gross Breesen.
I mean, I don't know actually if your family or how much your family got out. But I know, like my father's case, much of his family did not, and my grandparents never got out. And so I think
this also has something to do with never speaking German in your father's case.
Right, absolutely, not wanting. Yeah, he wasn't opposed to it. It was something
one doesn't.
Yeah, it's part of a past that he was trying to leave behind. But did your family escape?
My father was killed, my mother was killed, my brother was killed.
This is a picture postcard that my grandparents sent to my dad in 1940. They're bundled up in their coats against the cold, and they look all comfortable. It was a postcard they sent saying that they hoped that they could get out of Germany soon and join him in Virginia. It was the last correspondence that Rudi ever got from Bruno and Minna. Nobody knows exactly what happened to the Jews in Königsberg. They were transported out at some point and either shot along the way or shipped to a concentration camp. I'm standing in a place that probably Rudi was about 65 years ago, and I thought I might have something really great to say, but I really don't at this point. All I know is sometimes one is driven to find a place because of the meaning it has beyond the actual physical walls and the land that it's on and the borders that it now has. And now that we found the place, we can go with a little more peace because we know that the place is being taken care of and that the history that took place here will still be preserved.
When I left Gross Breesen, I was ready to face anything. The inner strength we got there, it's impossible to understand what it did to us.
Life was tough there, and the toughness was enjoyable. And I think it has helped me during my whole life.
They got the idea of life is important, not life is beautiful. Life is important.
That story, plus an update on the Binghamton watershed proposal, coming up at the state.
So now you've heard the one about the Jewish farmer. In a way, this is both an end and a beginning for me.
Is that sound as well?
The Gross Breeseners hold reunions every year to share stories from the past and the present. They tell me stories about my dad and show me photos of their children and their grandchildren.
How we went through the Holocaust.
I can't recommend it highly. My only regret is that I didn't do it when my father was alive.
I see now that I am not the only child of a Gross Breesener who realizes that Gross Breesen is not just an important story, a story we heard from our parents. Gross Breesen is a part of who we are.
To live together with other people that age who share your values, whether the values are Jewish ones, German Jewish, is a really intense experience.
I've realized how set apart I am, not just being Jewish, but more being, German Jew, daughter of refugee parents.
I'm sure that he has the feeling that I have these opportunities that he never had, and he wants me to take the full benefit of those.
But in many ways, I felt growing up that My father was very much like you describe your father, like very much just like, this is what you got to do what you got to do. And it wasn't in the words, it was in the guidance.
And I don't think our parents ever had the opportunity to be young in the sense that we understand what it's like to have been young, you know, and the privileges that we are passing on to our children now.
This is my daughter.
This is really amazing. This was my dad's ticket that took him, along with 5 other Gross Breezeners, from Hamburg to New York. It's dated August 10th, 1939, and of course they didn't know that, but this was only about 2 weeks before World War II started. It says Auswanderer, literally, someone who is wandering out, someone who is not returning.
I'm Deborah Hirsch, mayor, the daughter of Hans-Georg Hirsch.
And I'm Marga Hirsch, also a daughter of Hans-Georg Hirsch.
I'm Jeffrey Kahn, son of Herko Kahn.
I'm Marge Lowe, daughter of Ernest and Eva Lowe.
I'm Jeff Krieger, son of Hans Krieger.
I am Michael Caplan, son of Rudi Caplan, and I too am a Gross Breezener, and that's what I want the next generation to know.
Daddy, can I touch the camera? Nice photo.